Hello once again, and welcome back to another Autistic Transit Fan Yap session. Today we are going to start a brand new series on improving the railway system of Norway. This video will be the first in many parts, and in this video we will be discussing improvements to existing plans and rerouting existing lines on the V train network, that is, the network run by the Norwegian National Rail Operator, formerly known as NSB, now known as V. There will also be a second parter for this specific video where I talk about improvements that I would make to existing plans for lines not run by V, that is, the lines run by SJ Nord, SJ, and Go Ahead Norway. After that, I may make a few more videos about plans that aren't currently in progress or even being planned at all, like new lines, infill stations, or things as simple as line upgrades. So, with all that out of the way, let's get started on this video. Here's a map of V's current rail network. It is mainly centered around commuter rail operations around the city of Oslo, but we'll get back to that system with a more detailed map of that network because it is very complicated and this map does not give it justice. They also run the line between Notodden and Skien, which runs as a short little shuttle line known as the Bergen. They run long-distance trains to Bergen, as well as local trains between Myrdal and Bergen, and in the summer all the way to Gjøvik, as well as a line from Myrdal to Flåm. There are also a few lines that are inexplicably shown as part of the Oslo regional rail system, such as the line that runs all the way to Göteborg in Sweden, as well as I believe it's 2 or 3 trains a day that go all the way to Dombås instead of ending in Lillehammer like the rest of the services. And here is a map with a more detailed look of all of the services run in the Oslo region. You can see that there are quite a few, and there are a few lines on this map that we need to discuss a bit further before actually getting into it. So one that I already mentioned was the line shown on the map is going all the way to Dombås. That main stretching north of Lillehammer is mainly run by trains on SJ Nord, which we will not be discussing, and the line to Dombås really only sees like a few trains a day, so we're not really going to be discussing it in this video. The line to Göteborg is also of note, as for some reason it is shown on a map of the Oslo regional rail system, despite the fact that the section to Halden from Oslo is about the same distance as the section from Halden to Göteborg, so the scale is quite a bit off here. Also of note is the Flytoget service, which is Oslo's airport express service, and also one of the only high-speed rail lines in the country of Norway, which actually has more high-speed rail lines than the US, go figure. Anyway, this service is not run by V, and it requires special tickets to get. The Flytoget is also notable for the fact that if you are going to the airport, you can only board at all stations except for the airport, and you can only exit at all stations besides the airport if you are going away from the airport. Anyway, back to the system run by V. So, before we start breaking down each individual route, I'd just like to mention that Norway has 4 different ways of classifying train routes. Every single operator in the country, except for the Airport Express, follows these rules, so it makes it a lot easier to understand all the different networks, despite them being run by separate companies. So, let's break down each individual line run by V by its line type and designation, starting off with the local trains, or lokaltog. The first one of these is L1, which runs from Spikkestad to Lillestrøm, making use of the old main lines to Drammen and through to Lillestrøm. Express trains use newer alignments that were built in the 1990s and 2010s that bypass these older sections, as shown on the map between Lillestrøm and Oslo S, but curiously not shown in any other spots along the line. Next is the L2, which runs services from Stabekk to Ski, and has a similar story to the L1, where it uses an older main line that was recently bypassed by a brand new line for express trains, this one opening in 2022. And then you have the anomaly of the local trains, the oxymoron, as it is, the local express train, the L2X, which runs alongside the L2 from Oslo S to Ski. However, the L2X skips a few stops between Oslo S and Ski while still using the older main line. Lastly, there's the L4, one of the funniest looking local trains that I've ever seen when you look at it on a map. It is a tiny little shuttle route that runs from Bergen to Arna, underneath the Ulriken mountain. Despite the shortness of this route, it actually gets some pretty good ridership because of just how frequently it runs, despite the fact that the tunnel underneath Ulriken for a very long time was single-tracked. It also takes only around 6 minutes to get from Bergen to Arna by train. Moving on to our next tier of service, we have the regional trains, or regiontog. These are designated by the letter R followed by a double-digit number. The first digit of said number corresponds to the local train that runs on that route, or if there is no local train on that route, is represented by the intercity train that runs along that route, which we are yet to talk about. In numerical order, the regional trains run by V are the R12 from Kongsberg to Eidsvoll, the R13 from Drammen to Dal, with some services beginning at Kongsberg, the R14 from Asker to Kongsvinger on the Swedish border, the R21 from Stabekk to Moss, the R22 from Oslo S to Mysen and Rakkestad, the R23 from Oslo S to Ski, the R23X, which is not shown on this map, a limited service from Oslo S to Moss, the R31, formerly known as the L3, hence why it got the 3 designation, that runs from Oslo S to Jaren and Gjøvik, the R40 from Bergen to Voss and Myrdal, with services in the summer going all the way to Geilo, the R45, the service between Myrdal and Flåm, and the R55 from Notodden to Porsgrunn. Next up are the regional express trains, also known as regionekspresstog. These are designated by RE, followed by a 2-digit number, and follows the same numbering rule as the regional trains. These, in numerical order, are the RE10 from Drammen to Lillehammer, with very limited service further north to Dombås, the RE11 from Skien to Eidsvoll, the RX11, a service that is curiously mentioned on the map but not shown, which also runs from Skien to Eidsvoll and is the express variant of the already express RE11, the RE20 from Oslo S to Halden and Göteborg, which is by far one of the longest regional trains in Norway, the RX20, another service not shown on the map, and is another express variant of an already express line running from Oslo S to Fredrikstad to supplement the RE20. And finally, there is the RE30, running from Oslo S to Gjøvik. Last but not least are the Fjerntog, also known as intercity trains, and these are designated as F plus a single-digit number. There's only one that V currently operates, and that is the F4 from Bergen to Oslo. Now that we've discussed the V train network, let's begin discussing how we can improve it. More specifically, let's start talking about what V is already doing and how we can branch off of that and add new ideas. So, let's start from the very eastern side of the network with the Østfold lines, or the lines to Rakkestad, Mysen, Moss, and Halden and Ski. So, the original main line here is actually what the L2 and L2X use, as shown in video right now. And it is a 2-tracked affair. The express trains used to share this line up until very recently, when a massive 22-kilometer tunnel was built that bypasses the entire thing between Oslo S and Ski, which basically doubled the frequency of most express services, as they didn't have to stop and wait for local trains to keep going. And that's not even close to the full story of the improvements and upgrades that are scheduled for the Østfold line. They're trying to upgrade it currently to high-speed standards, and that tunnel was part of that. They're also double-tracking the section all the way south to Fredrikstad, which is currently supposed to be completed by 2029. While these improvements are going to be super helpful for the line, I think V should consider reorganizing some of the services that run, beginning with the line's two local services, the L2 and the L2X. I personally think the L2 is fine the way it is, from a routing standpoint. Frequency could be improved, but I believe that's something that V is already working on for the line. Therefore, I don't really have anything else to say about the L2. It's overall a good line as of right now. The L2X is a different story, however. I'm not entirely sure if, as of today, the benefits outweigh the costs of running the L2X. The reason for this is mainly because the line that the L2 and the L2X run on is double-tracked. In fact, the only location where a train could overtake another train is at the station at Kolbotn. This means that express trains would constantly get stuck behind local trains because they're unable to overtake them, and the only way to prevent this would be to have express trains leave the station as far behind the previous local train as possible, which obviously affects frequency of local services and express services. So, without extra spots being added where express trains can pass local trains, I'm not entirely sure if keeping the L2X around would be great for the frequency of either line. However, the line is set to see upgrades coming in the near future, which will increase the speed limit on tracks that the L2 and L2X run on. However, upgrades to the frequency of these lines can't really be put in place until these upgrades are done. So as of now, I'm not entirely sure if keeping the L2X around is a good idea. That is, if you want to increase frequency on the L2. However, it is important to keep in mind that the other express option is direct from Oslo S to Ski and skips a lot of local stops, so the L2X might actually have a bit more use. Let me know what you think if you're from the area, and if you would like to see the L2X removed in favor of increasing frequency. Sure, we're probably going to bring it back once those track upgrades are completed, though. Moving on to the regional trains on the Follo line, let's start with the R21. Now, the R21 is currently a service that runs from Stabekk to Moss, and it is currently the only regional train on that southern part of the network that doesn't end in Oslo S. With the double tracking of the line south of Ski all the way to Fredrikstad, I think it would kind of make sense for the R21 to take over maybe a few of those services that are currently the RX20 to Fredrikstad, and I would also extend it from Stabekk to Askøy for reasons that I'll get back to in a minute when we cover that section of the network. Moving on to the R22, this line uses the Indre Østfold line and runs to Mysen and Rakkestad. However, if you've ever been on the line, you'll notice that the tracks continue further after Rakkestad, and actually end up joining the regular Østfold line at Sarpsborg. Now, I would love to see trains on this line extended from Rakkestad to Sarpsborg. Only a few services actually go all the way to Rakkestad, so it would only make sense to extend those two services a little bit further to Sarpsborg. This also helps provide an alternative route for regular passengers trying to get between Halden and Ski if they have to go via Mysen. Moving on to the R23, this one's a bit pointless. It's essentially a long shuttle line that runs from Oslo S to Ski via the brand new Express Follo line. Now, currently, south of Ski, the junction between the Indre Østfold line is a flat junction, which means that trains on R22 have to cross over the tracks of RE20 and R21 to actually get into Ski. A brand new flyover is being proposed, and I think that once that is built, there's really nothing stopping the R21 and R22 from essentially splitting the R23 services between them 50-50 as extra services on both these lines. I would have the R21 services end in Moss, and I would have the extra R22 services end at Mysen. Now let's talk about the RE20, and while we're at it, we'll also mention the RX20. So I would essentially split the RE20 into two separate services. I would keep the RE20 designation for the trains that terminate in Halden, but I would reclassify the trains that go all the way to Göteborg as the F2, as they would become inner-city long-distance trains as they should be classified on the map. The RX20 is a bit of a weird service considering the fact that it ends in Fredrikstad, and since we've already absorbed some of its services into the R21 as we discussed previously, I would absorb the rest of them into the F2, as the only stations that it really skips that the RE20 stops at are Rygge and Råde, which are both stations that RE20 trains to Göteborg currently skip anyway. Moving on to the main section of the Oslo Regional Rail System, that being the lines that already continue through the city center, let's start with the L1. Now, the L1 currently is actually pretty fine as it is, so I'm not sure if I would make any changes to it. The only thing that I might consider changing would be to short-turn some of the trains, considering the fact that the line from Asker to Spikkestad is mostly single track. Because the L1 is the only local train on this section, let's move on to the regional trains, starting with the R12. And this is where things get really interesting. You see, this is one of the only spots in the country where a brand new rail line is being proposed, the Ringerike line, a high-speed rail line that would go from Hønefoss to Sandvika, essentially cutting over an hour off from the existing travel time for trains from Bergen to Oslo. However, if all of the trains on the line are diverted to run via this section, the station at Vikersund would have to be closed, and I'm not a big fan of closing train stations. Now, you might be asking, how does this affect the R12? Well, it affects the R12 because I'm going to be making changes to the R13. My first course of action would be to have the R12 trains stop at Lier and Brakerøya stations, which they currently skip. This would mean that all the regional trains on that section would make stops at those stations. However, I would also still have the regional express trains skip those stations. Next, I would extend the R13 to Hønefoss via the existing line through Hokksund and Vikersund. This would share tracks with the R12 between Hokksund and Drammen. This would keep service on the line while still allowing express trains to use the brand new Ringerike line. Then onto the R14. Remember how I said a few minutes ago that the R21 should be extended from Stabekk to Asker? Well, that's because the R14 currently ends in Asker, but what I would do is cut it back to Sandvika and then extend it along the Ringerike line to Hønefoss, making all stops along that planned line. This is mainly because I feel that the Torpenrud station, which is being planned, is a bit too close to the Hønefoss station for an inner-city train to be the only line serving it. So I would shift the R14 up to that section, that way that station could have service from a regional train instead. Now on to the regional express services on this section, that being the RE10, RE11, and RX11. Compared to all the other X services that I've talked about so far, the RX11 is the one that I'm actually okay with staying, and the main reason for it is because the line that it runs on, the Vestfold line, is currently being upgraded to high-speed standards, and a lot of the stations are actually going to have passing loops and extra tracks, which would allow for express trains to overtake local trains. So there's not really that much of an issue of having express service. This is especially true because the Vestfold line is a very long rail line, so it makes sense to have some sort of express service to supplement the RE11. As for the RE10, I think it's pretty much fine as it is. The only gripe I have with it is the trains that extend all the way to Dombås. I'm not sure if they should be run by V, mainly because that section is very far up in SJ Nord territory. Before we move on to talking about the final group of lines in the Oslo region, the lines up to Gjøvik, we're going to discuss the R55, the Bratsbergbahn, which runs to Notodden from Porsgrunn. Now, this line is pretty cool. I mean, the frequency can't really get much better, it's mostly single track, but if V can spare the train sets, I would like to see maybe one or two express trains that'll take you all the way up to Oslo. If not all the way up to Oslo, then maybe just all the way up to Drammen. Oh, I also forgot to mention about the R13, is that it should be extended from Dal to Eidsvoll, because the track connection is already there, and that was the way the old main line went. Maybe they could even reinstate some of the old abandoned stations. Moving on to the last group of lines in the Oslo area are the two lines up to Gjøvik, the RE30 and the R31. I'm perfectly fine with these lines the way they are. However, there's one change I would make to the R31, and that is it doesn't really have to extend all the way up to Gjøvik. It should probably end all services at Jaren, because the RE30 already goes all the way to Gjøvik, and the stopping patterns of the two lines aren't really that different, even though the RE30 is express. And it kind of makes more sense to have the express train go further out than the local train, instead of having them both go the same amount of distance. I feel like there's just a bit too much overlap there, especially because the Gjøvik line is mainly single track. Now it's finally time to talk about our last group of lines, the lines out from Bergen. Now, the L4, the local service, is fine how it is. Shuttle service from Bergen to Oslo runs pretty frequently, and the ridership definitely shows that it's a useful line. I wouldn't get rid of it, I'd keep it how it is. I like it. I would redesignate all the services that short turn at Voss as the R41, especially because a lot of R40 services out to Myrdal and Gjøvik skip a few stops on the section between Bergen and Voss. As for the R40 and the R45, well, the R40 runs all the way to Gjøvik during the summers, but in the winters, trains usually end in Myrdal. So what I would do would be to extend every other train on the R40 from Myrdal to Flåm, and have it essentially supplement the R45 to Flåm. But on a map this would probably be shown as the R45 being extended to Bergen. This would mean that the R45 would be partially swapped over to the regional rail trains. It currently uses more long-distance style coaches. However, once the new intercity train fleet, which is currently being built by Stadler, enters service, I would love to see one of those trains put on the Flåm line, only making stops at Myrfjell, Voss, Dale, Arna, and Bergen. That way, the tourists using the Flåm line will have a direct connection to the city of Bergen without having to change trains, even if it's just 1 or 2 trains a day that do this. Last but not least, there's the F4. Outside of already planned service changes, like rerouting it through the Ringerike line, I wouldn't really change anything about the F4. It's a pretty decent, solid intercity line. It's a really beautiful one at that. Since this video is mostly talking about easy-to-implement changes that are already permitted through the track layouts, or planned track layouts, there's not really much I can change about it. I think it's a solid line. So, that's pretty much going to do it for the first episode of this series where I talk about improving the Norwegian railway network. If you like the video, give it a like. Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next few parts of this series. The next video in the series will be pretty similar to this one, except I'm going to be talking about the networks operated by SJ Nord, SJ, and Go Ahead Norway. That video might not be out for a while though. It's been pretty busy, so I'm not sure how long it's going to be until the next one drops. I don't really have a upload schedule going on or anything. But yeah, that's going to do it for me today. I'm the Autistic Transit Fan, and I'll be signing off. Thank you for watching.